I grew up in Roswell, New Mexico, the site of the first UFO crash. And what I am suggesting is it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence. And I call upon our government to open up.
If you had been here 10 years ago and standing out here and looking up there at the lights and the view, you would have been astounded. You would have been amazed. And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft. Some form of an alien spacecraft.
My name is James Peniston, United States Air Force retired. In 1980, I was assigned to the largest tactical fighter wing in the Air Force at the time. I was stationed at RAF Woodbridge, England. I was the senior security officer in charge of that base security. At that time, I held a top secret U.S. and NATO security clearance and was responsible for the protection of the war-making resources for that base. When we arrived to the suspected crash site, it quickly became apparent that we were not dealing with a plane crash, or for that matter, anything else we've ever responded to. There was a bright light emanating from an object on the forest floor. As we approached it on foot, a silhouetted triangular craft about 9 feet long, 6.5 feet high, came into view. The craft was fully intact and sitting in a small clearing just inside the woods. As the three of us got closer to the craft, we started experiencing radio difficulties. I then asked Airman Kabansak to relay the radio transmissions back to our control center, act as a relay. Burroughs and I proceeded towards the craft. When we came up on the triangular-shaped craft, there were blue and yellow lights swirling around the exterior as though they were part of the surface. The air around us was electrically charged, and we could feel it on our clothes, our skin, and our hair. Nothing in my training prepared me for what I was witnessing. After 10 minutes without any apparent aggression, I determined the craft was non-hostile to my team and to the base. Following the security protocols, we completed a thorough on-site investigation. This included a full physical examination of the craft. On one side of the craft, there were symbols that measured 3 inches high, and they're approximately about 2.5 feet long. These symbols were pictorial in design. The largest symbol was a triangle and was centered in the middle of the others. These symbols were etched in the surface of the craft, which was warm to the touch. Even though it looked like black onyx, it felt like metal. The feeling I had during the encounter was like no type of aircraft that I've ever seen before. It was in the Jane's book of known aircraft or anything I've seen since. After roughly about 45 minutes, the light from the craft began to intensify. Burroughs and I then took a defensive position away from the craft as it lifted off the ground without any noise or air disturbance. It maneuvered through the trees and shot off at an unbelievable rate of speed. It was gone in a blink of an eye. In my law book that I have right here, I wrote, "Speed, impossible." That night, over 80 Air Force personnel, all trained observers assigned to the 81st Security Police Squadron, witnessed the takeoff. The team and witnesses were told to treat the investigation as top secret, and no further discussion would be allowed.
And this was never made up by a human being. This was something that was totally different. So the only reason I'm here is to tell you, let's disclose this whenever we can, please.
I've read about this incident you had in 1951, and you said you saw literally hundreds of unidentifiable flying objects.
Yes, they were flying quite high. How high we couldn't tell because we couldn't get anywhere near their altitude. But they were either very large craft way up or smaller craft still well above what we could get to.
For a day and a half, all of this happened. In 1951, you couldn't even get close to the things that were flying overhead. You or anyone else that was flying.
They were faster, higher.
Michio Kaku, professor of physics at CUNY University and host of Sci-Fi Science on the Science Channel, got to read the book early, and he joins us with a review. Quite simply, Professor, do unidentified flying objects without question exist?
95% of all UFO sightings can be immediately identified as the planet Venus, weather balloons, weather anomalies, swamp gas, you name it, we've got it nailed. It's the 5% that give you the willies. 5% remain totally unexplained.
And you're saying to 5% unexplained to the point where they are legitimately an unidentified flying object.
And we're talking about generals, we're talking about Air Force pilots, we're talking about governors of states that claim that, hey, this is beyond our understanding of the laws of physics.
Can I have an unidentified flying object that is not necessarily from some other place?
It's possible, but we've looked at all the alternatives. These are multiple sightings by multiple modes. In other words, pilots, eyewitnesses, radar, visual sightings. These are very hard to dismiss, the handful of sightings. one over Alaska, another over Belgium, another over Iran. The handful of things that still cannot be explained defy known laws of physics. We're talking about senior military officials who were involved in the investigations of these incidents saying we are clueless.
If you were to look at those who argue, well, hang on, there's no way that they could get here from some other planet, that the technology doesn't exist, the stars are too far away, you rebut that sort of thinking with what?
Those people assume that there may be 100 years ahead of us, in which case it's impossible for them to reach us. But if they're 1,000, 1,000,000 years ahead of us, then new laws of physics begin to open up. So we have to open our mind to the possibility that they're not just a super version of us, that they could be thousands, millions of years more advanced.
Why would they not then pay us a visit in a way that is more recognizable? Go visit the White House, maybe stop out to Yellowstone.
My point of view is if you're walking on a country road in St. Anthill, do you go down to the ants and say, I bring you trinkets, I bring you beads, I give you nuclear energy, or perhaps maybe you step on a few of them? If they're that advanced, maybe they simply are not that interested in us.
All right. Before I let you go, do you teach on this subject at the university? On UFOs
I mention it
specifically?
when I teach astronomy. Also in sci-fi science, we have a whole episode about what kinds of physics could open up in the next 1,000, next million
They
years.
could let us travel a few million miles at a time.
New kinds of physics on the Science Channel.
Very cool. Listen, a pleasure.
Then new laws of physics begin to open up.
Describe what they look like.
I could, but it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance. And that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
Well, Don, it began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964, and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, but they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know. And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, "Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House?" The idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so. It's the nature of the military mind, I think, to be paranoid. But that was only part of the story. The SHAPE conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. The evidence that we had collected and the evidence that they had repeatedly demonstrated to us, and that's no accident. It became very clear after a time that there was a program or a process of some kind underway, that they had demonstrated over and over and over again that they apparently were able to manipulate matter and time. Now this really shook up our scientists. The idea that there could be intelligences from somewhere else, from other dimensions, coming and going into our reality. It's been quite a shake-up in traditional science. I guess I speak out openly and bluntly about this because I feel so strongly about it. I violate my security oath every time I speak about it. I do it intentionally and I do it on purpose, because I feel so strongly that the American people not only have a right to know the truth, but they have a need to know the truth. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life. I find that exciting. It doesn't frighten me. The SHAPE study concluded in '64 that if they, whoever they were malevolent or hostile, that they could have taken this planet and cleaned it up and eliminated us, turned us into dog food or whatever, a long, long time ago. That the historical evidence indicates that they've been with us a long time, and I've concluded that we had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with at least one of those groups.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Ray Bowyer, and I fly a civilian airliner as captain. I've been invited here due to my sighting last April of multiple as yet unidentified objects over the Channel Islands region of the English Channel. This encounter lasted for 15 minutes, and the first object being visible from 55 miles distance. On nearing the object, a second identical shape appeared beyond the first. Both objects were of a flattened disc shape with a dark area to the right. They were brilliant yellow with light emanating from within, and I estimated them to be up to possibly a mile across. I found myself astounded but curious But at 12 miles distant, these objects were becoming uncomfortably large, and I was glad to descend and land the aircraft. Many of my passengers saw the objects, as did the pilot of another aircraft 25 miles further south.
Never stop the car on a drive in the dark.
Am frühen Abend bauten wir unsere Instrumente auf. Meine Arbeit bestand darin, anhand von Sternenbeobachtung genaue Längen und Breitengrade zu ermitteln. In dieser Nacht, als es passierte, beendeten wir gerade die Messungen der sogenannten Himmels-, und atmosphärischen Beobachtungen im Südosten des Standortes Konrad. Es war vielleicht so 1 Uhr oder halb 2 Uhr morgens, als ein unidentifiziertes fliegendes Objekt aus dem Norden kam und direkt über uns stoppte. Ich würde sagen, vielleicht in 100 Metern Höhe oder so. Das ist im Dunkeln schwer zu sagen. Es war rund. Seinen Durchmesser würde ich auf ungefähr 15 Meter schätzen. Es war eben ziemlich groß, so wie die Flügelspannweite einer B-52, etwa in der Art. Wirklich ziemlich groß. Pulsierende Lichter schienen ringsherum zu laufen. Und es hatte ein weißes Licht in der Mitte, das nach unten auf das Silo schien. Es gab keinen Wind und wir hörten kein Geräusch. Es blieb dort vielleicht 20 bis 30 Sekunden, höchstens. Und dann erinnere ich mich, wie ich auf den Sternenhimmel starre. Ich kannte mich ja gut aus mit den Sachen da oben. Und dann dieser Himmelskörper über mir. Und da sagte ich mir, was ist, wenn dieses Ding mich jetzt hochbeamt und weit wegträgt und nie mehr zur Erde zurückkehrt?
Beams us up and takes us off to some distant place and never returned to Earth again. I mean, this is going through my head.
Das ging mir so durch den Kopf, als dieses Ding über mir schwebte. Und aus diesem Stillstand schoss es dann nach Osten davon. Gerade war es noch da und plötzlich war es weg.
Never look for the truth in your mother's eyes.
Знаете, вот я за свою довольно долгую жизнь встречал множество людей. Но я никогда не встречал человека, который сам говорил, что он побывал на межкосмическом, межпланетном корабле с инопланетянами, как говорили вы. Причем случилось это, по вашим словам, в апреле 1997 года, правильно, да?
Немного поправили, 18 сентября 1997.
Простите. Но это действительно случилось?
Ну, если серьезно, да, это было.
Но только серьезно,
да,
конечно.
Конечно, передача серьезная.
Расскажите чуть-чуть о том, как это было.
Ну, это было как раз в субботу, в сентябре 1997 года, я собирался в Калмыкию. И вечером приехал домой на квартиру, это Леонтьевский переулок.
Здесь, в Москве?
Здесь, в Москве, да.
Так.
И вечером почитал книгу, посмотрел телевизор, вот, пошел отдыхать уже. И потом уже как бы, ну, наверное, засыпал, почувствовал, что балкон открылся и кто-то зовет. Ну, подошел, да, смотрю, вот такая как труба полупрозрачная. Я пошел в эту трубу и увидел людей в желтых скафандрах. У меня часто спрашивают, как. Ну, началось общение, у меня часто спрашивают, на каком языке общался. Ну, наверное, на уровне мысли, потому что не хватало немного кислорода, воздуха. Дали мне понять, вот здесь вот немного потрогайте, все будет нормально. И затем вот была экскурсия. Затем был диалог, почему вы не выходите в прямой эфир по телеканалам и не говорите, что вы находитесь здесь, смотрите, общаетесь с нами. Ну, сказали, что мы еще не готовы к встрече. Ну и затем также вот обратно вернули, но я бы, наверное, не поверил в это, если бы не было троих свидетелей. Это мой водитель, и министр, мой помощник, который...
Imagine the final sound as a gun. smashing windscreen of a car. Did you ever imagine the last thing you'd hear as you fade in and out was a song? Arriving somewhere, but not here. All my designs simplified. And all of my plans compromised. And all of my dreams sacrificed.
That morning in the FAA round room, it was either 9 or 10 o'clock, 3 men from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 CIA people, 3 FBI people, and I don't remember who the other guys were, along with all the FAA experts that I brought with me that could decide or talk about the hardware and the software, how it worked. We put on a dog and pony show. We let them watch the video. We had all the data there. We had all the printouts that the computer put out. They got all excited over it. When it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. When I asked him why, I thought it was probably just a stealth bomber at the time. He says, well, this is the first time that we have recorded radar data on a UFO, and these guys are going to get all excited, drooling over all this data. I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it? And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public. He says, we're going to go back and study this. I said, okay. It was what he was going to do. Now, I've told this story many times, and I get sometimes funny looks from people. I have with me the voice tapes of the controllers that were involved, the FAA original tapes. See, after we handed this stuff off to the president's staff, the FAA didn't know what to do with it. We don't separate UFOs from real traffic, so it's not our problem. Okay? I have a copy of the original of the video that we took, which is rather interesting. And once the thing was all over, the reports started coming into my office. But because it wasn't an FAA air traffic problem, the FAA's report ended up on a table in my office. And it stayed there until I retired, when one of the staffers packed up all my gear and helped it move to my house. Also, in a box I found just a few days ago, in my 1992 tax return, I have the target printouts from the computer data, which, so if you wanted to return or look at every target that was up there at the time, you can now reproduce this from this piece of paper here. And it's called the UFO Incident, Japan 1648, I believe the number was, that happened on November the 18th, 1986. I'm prepared to go to Congress, to swear before Congress that everything I've told you people and everything that is here is the truth. Thank you.
On the smashing windscreen of a car, did you ever imagine the last thing you'd hear as you fade in and out?
Decades ago, visitors from other planets warned us about where we were headed and offered to help. But instead, we, or at least some of us, interpreted their visits as a threat and decided to shoot first and ask questions after.
I didn't believe in UFOs until London Control called us in the winter of 1962 and asked us, would we chase one? And we said, sure. So we let down from 30,000 feet to 1,000 feet where the UFO was hovering, and we went into a steep dive and actually exceeded the red line of the aircraft. So it's kind of dangerous chasing UFOs. In any case, I was able to get the UFO on the aircraft radar at about 40 miles, and we could see a light out in the distance, and as we closed, we kept on picking up this radar return. The point I'm mentioning that the radar return was very distinct and solid, indicating it was some kind of a metallic object. We got about a mile from the UFO, and it kind of lit up in the sky and went off into space, very similar to what the shuttle looks like when it takes off. Later on, I was working in intelligence in Vietnam. I briefed General Brown about UFOs. When I was in 21st Air Force, in McGuire Air Force Base, I briefed General Glau about a UFO over Tehran, Iran in 1976. That two F-4s from the Iranian Air Force had taken off and tried to intercept the UFO, and when they turned on their fire control systems, they immediately went on, all the electrical systems went out, the planes had to return to base. This was particularly significant because it was also picked up on satellites. In 1978, on January 18th, I was going into the base. Every morning I did the briefing to the general staff, and I noticed that there are some lights off in the distance at the end of the runway there. And when I got into the command post, the senior master sergeant in charge said that there had been UFOs in the pattern all night. They're on radar. The tower had seen them. They gotten aircraft reports and so on. And that one had landed or crashed at Fort Dix. Fort Dix and McGuire are right together. And this is kind of like the Roswell of the East. But in any case, an alien had come off the craft and had been shot by a military policeman, and apparently was wounded and was heading for McGuire. So for whatever reason, the aliens liked the Air Force better than the Army, perhaps because they're shooting at them. But in any case, our security police went out there and found him on the end of the runway dead. And they asked me to brief the general staff, General Tom Sadler, and at the 8 o'clock stand-up briefing, and I said, I don't think I want to do this. You know, the general doesn't have a good sense of humor, and I'm not sure I believe this. So I did some checking, called the 438th Command Post, and everybody had pretty much the same story. And at 8 o'clock that morning, just before I went on, was going to brief this, and I was very worried about it. They said, don't brief it, that it's too hot, so to speak. That's pretty much my story, and I'm prepared to tell the story in front of Congress.
All my designs simplified.
Irgendwann am Abend des 24. März erhielt ich einen Anruf von einem meiner Sicherheitsleute. Sie hatten merkwürdige Lichter dabei beobachtet, wie sie Manöver vollzogen, und wollten Bericht erstatten. Ich hielt das erst für einen komischen Bericht, aber ich nahm ihn ernst. Sie müssen wissen, wir haben schließlich Atomwaffen bewacht, und die Berichte, die wir erhielten, waren normalerweise sehr professionell. Ich habe den Anruf dann irgendwie abgetan. Doch ungefähr 5 Minuten später rief er mich wieder zurück. Diesmal schrie er ins Mikrofon und sagte, er konnte ein Objekt sehen, das rot glühte und direkt über dem Vordereingang schwebte. Es hatte einen Durchmesser von ungefähr 10 Metern. Er konnte nicht so viele Details an dem Objekt erkennen, nur dass es pulsierte. Und er war genau wie die anderen Wachleute sehr verängstigt. Er bat mich um Anweisungen und ich glaube, ich sagte so etwas wie, passen Sie auf, dass nichts in den abgesperrten Bereich gelangt. Dann legte er den Hörer schnell wieder auf und ich weckte meinen Kommandanten Fred Maywald, der gerade eine Ruhepause machte. Als ich gerade am Telefon mit ihm war, gingen alle Raketen in den Status nicht verfügbar oder Start nicht möglich. Sie wurden im Grunde deaktiviert, während das Objekt noch über dem Stützpunkt schwebte, über dem Kontrollraum.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Parviz Jafari and I'm a retired general of Iranian Air Force. At about 11 p.m. on the evening of 18 September 1976, citizens were frightened by circling of an unknown object over Tehran, the capital city of Iran, at a low altitude. It looked similar to a star, but bigger and brighter. They reported it to the tower and was seen by Towerman 2. He alerted the Air Force Command Post and Deputy General Yousefi decided to scramble an F-4 jet to investigate. The pilot in the first jet lost instrumentation and communication when he got too close to the brilliant object, so he headed back. About 10 minutes later, they scrambled a second jet which I was piloting. At the time, I was a squadron commander. I approached the object, which was flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue. The light was so bright that I was not able to see its body. The sequence of flashes was extremely fast, like a strobe light. We locked on it with radar it was at 30 degrees left, at range of 25 miles. The size on the radar scope was comparable to that of a 707 tanker. 4 other objects with different shapes separated from the main one at different times during this close encounter. Whenever they were close to me, my weapons were jammed and my radio communications were garbled. One of the objects headed toward me. I thought it was a missile. I tried to launch a heat-seeker missile to it, but my missile panel went out. Another followed me when I was descending on the way back. One of the separated objects landed in an open area radiating a high bright light in which the sands on the ground were visible. We could hear emergency squash at all the way, which was reported by other airliners flying at the time and continued for another couple of days. During my interview at headquarters, after the incident, the American Lieutenant Colonel Alan Moy took notes, but after it was over, I could not find him to talk with. Later, once classified document was released here in America through the Freedom of Information Act. The Defense Intelligence Agency documented the event in a great detail, and it was sent to NSA, the White House, and the CIA. The DIA assessment said this case is a classic that meets all necessary conditions for a legitimate study of the UFO phenomena. Then I would be happy to answer questions and tell you more. Thank you.
All of my friends come from a hive. And all of my dreams sacrificed.
There were 3 or 4 objects.
Im Norden sahen wir 3 oder 4 Objekte mit hellen Farben, die von Ellipsen zu runden Formen wechselten und sich mit sehr hoher Geschwindigkeit und Manövern im scharfen Winkel bewegten, so als ob sie eine Rastersuche durchführten. 3 unserer Leute sahen sie und jemand anders bemerkte, dass im Süden 2 weitere Objekte am Himmel schwebten. Ein Objekt erreichte uns mit sehr hoher Geschwindigkeit, etwa in der Größenordnung von 3.000 bis 5.000 Fuß, stoppte direkt über uns und schickte einen konzentrierten Strahl zu unseren Füßen. Sein Durchmesser betrug ungefähr 30 Zentimeter. Den kann man am ehesten mit einer Art Laserstrahl gleichsetzen. Wir standen dort und wunderten uns. War das eine Warnung, ein Versuch der Kommunikation, eine Waffe oder vielleicht eine Sonde? Und genauso schnell wie es erschienen war, verschwand es auch wieder. Wir waren wirklich sehr beunruhigt. Ungefähr zu dem Zeitpunkt bekamen wir mit, dass das andere Objekt im Süden Strahlen nach unten schickte, 1 Meile von uns über dem Stützpunkt Woodbridge. Wir hatten 3 Funkgeräte dabei, Polizeifunk, Sicherheitsfunk und ich hatte das Kommandofunknetz. Alle 3 funktionierten tadellos, als wir mit der Leitstelle sprachen, aber dann riss die Verbindung ständig ab. Trotzdem bekamen wir über Funk mit, dass diese Strahlen auf das Waffenlager oder in die Nähe geschossen wurden und das sorgte für große Beunruhigung. Ich weiß nicht, was wir in dieser Nacht gesehen haben. Aber ich weiß, dass es unter intelligenter Steuerung stand und ich denke, es war entweder aus einer anderen Dimension oder außerirdisch.
All of my plans come from a hive. And all of my dreams sacrifice.
But what I am suggesting, it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence, and I call upon our government to open up.
We're talking about senior military officials who were involved in the investigations of these incidents saying we are clueless.
If you were to look at those who argue, well, hang on, there's no way that they could get here from some other planet, that the technology doesn't exist, the stars are too far away, you rebut that sort of thinking with what?
Those people assume that there may be 100 years ahead of us, in which case it's impossible for them to reach us. But if they're 1,000, 1,000,000 years ahead of us, then new laws of physics begin to open up.
Drinking down the poison the way you were taught.